when I moved to New York after college, I had a whole bunch of survival jobs, and one of them was bartending in Broadway theaters. So I wrote most of, my first play was A Few Good Men, and I wrote most of it on cocktail napkins during the first act of Bocage Fall.
And how do you do it now?
I miss those days, which is why I told that story. But there's a long while that doesn't look like writing. To a casual observer, it would look a lot like lying on my couch and watching ESPN. I also drive around, I listen to music. I do, the most important thing for me is getting started. The difference between being on page 2 and page nothing is life and death. So I'm looking for a way to get started. And once I do that, then I write at a computer. Either I have an office at Warner Brothers and I have an office at home, so I'm in one of those two places. I need to know what I'm going to write before I write it, and I need to, you know, I've got index cards on the board, and I try to write. You know, once I'm loaded up, once I know what I'm doing, I write with as much speed as I can. I feel like that speed and energy will translate itself onto the page. When it's coming in little drips and drabs, I know to stop because I don't know what I'm doing. So don't stop. Stop trying to find your way around in the dark. But speaking of finding your way around the dark, I don't know everything about what I'm going to write when I'm writing. It's a little like walking forward in the dark with a flashlight. You can only see as far ahead as the beam will go. When I know how it's going to end, and in this case, once I'd come up with how it was starting, I knew how it was going to end. That's a big victory for me, and I feel good about it. But I think all you wanted to know is how I write. I do it at my desk at a computer.
Scott.
Yeah, the sandwich, there's a good story about the cocktail napkins. I write at my desk at my computer. It's like a job. It's like going to the office. And I think having that discipline and setting a schedule is tough for a writer, because if not, everyone's like not doing anything. You're sitting around, mostly watching ESPN. Yeah, can you come help me move a couch or something? It's like, I'm writing. So it's sort of like so you try to, I have set hours now that sort of like, over the years, sort of like get, try to get to the desk at a certain time. I think the same way for me, I think you know where you're going as a writer. I don't know how I'm going to get there always. But I think in the same way, it's sort of like Michael said. I think if you know where you're going and you have that set, then that's sort of where you have to begin. But for me, I'm sort of a very slow writer, so I sort of will procrastinate. So I think I just sort of get as much research, sort of do as much shit as I can until it gets to a point where it just becomes ridiculous. It's like, you haven't started writing yet? You're kidding. So I think sort of getting all of that stuff and sort of like getting everything that you sort of need, that's sort of when I start.
David?
I'm going to bed. Or at least the first couple of hours. I'm very lucky. I have an apartment with a bit of an ocean view, and I have the bed facing it. So I get up, I make myself a coffee, and I sit there with my laptop like King Canute, ordering the waves in and out. Hey, baby. And that gives me a sense of entitlement and power. For me, the longest process on any project is the beginning, the research and doing a treatment. I worked for years with a partner. Now I don't, but I still keep the same technique of doing a very detailed treatment so I know exactly where I'm going. And early on when I did Tucker and was working with Francis, we had a conversation once that has held me in good stead. He was explaining how the first thing that he did on any project was know a big scene at the end, the penultimate scene as it were, and everything was then aimed towards that. And that's been a really good, helpful hint, and I've always used that. So I make 3x5 cards. If I have a large home, which I don't anymore, with a corkboard, I put it all on there. Now I put it on the living room carpet, and I can't open the windows for 2 weeks because my structure is absolutely shot. In terms of the actual working day, as I say, I'll start the first hour or so in bed if I can get away with it, which I usually can. I'm sure that eBay was invented for my benefit too, so I can do something other than write. I'll work from say 9 or 9:30 until about 2:33 when I hit that metabolic low that most people have. When I find my forehead is resting on the space bar, I know that I've done it for the day. I'll do some exercise, go for a 90-minute walk, go for a run. That may be the day, but if I'm under pressure for a deadline or heading down the home stretch and have built up a real head of steam, I'll then start again maybe when the sun is just going down the yard arm and work another whole stretch. I can do a double day that way. And that's the way I do it.
Charlie?
Yeah, a lot of things get done besides writing when you're writing. Yeah, it's all right. But I think for me, how I'm writing depends on what's happening in the story. I can't, enforce some sort of pattern on that. I'll tell you something that happened just the other day. My character was about to do something that's going to really impact her life in a big way, and I could see it coming, and I couldn't do it. I just could not do it. I couldn't sit down. I couldn't make myself sit down to do it. I just couldn't do it, and I couldn't do it to her. She couldn't see it coming, you know what I'm saying? She couldn't see it coming, and I could. And I just got the glimpse before I got up from the desk of what was about to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen until that moment, and I saw that, and I couldn't sit down for 2 days. So, and finally I got my courage up to go back. So a lot of my process is determined by what's happening inside the story.
How do you all deal with writer's block? I mean, what are your techniques for getting around it?
I'll jump in. I think one of the reasons you get writer's block is because you're trying to find the perfect answer right off the bat. You're trying to hit the bullseye right off the bat. And that you just stop dead in your tracks. And just what you can do is say, okay, I'm just going to make a list of ideas. I don't care if they're good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just going to list everything. Here's an example, which was how to get out of the scene when the cop pulls them over in the sunshine. It ended up being Grandpa's, magazines basically, but I didn't really have an ending of that scene. And you just go, okay, well, what do they have at their disposal? Or it's the claw rescuing them at the dump. You go, okay, well, there needs to be a life or death jeopardy situation. They need to get rescued at the last second. What do we have? And instead of trying to find the perfect answer, you just list everything that's at a dump, just every possible thing that you can think of, and then you try, you can start doing things in the right chronology or just picking which one is best. But I think that if you're blocked, I think just start making lists. That's like step one for me is just make a list.
Lisa, your method and your whatever you want to say. Oh God, I could just have a whole seminar on this. I would say, I employ many of these techniques. This script was a really interesting learning curve for me. Two huge things that came out of it were carding, because you can see your whole film, in front of your face and see what's redundant and see what's not, it has no causality, and really look structurally at where you're going. And it's just something for some reason, I think I got bad advice in graduate school. I had this teacher that was really, you gotta go with your, sort of instinct and blurts and just let it ride. It's gonna come out of you. And it was very free form, but there's something incredibly anxiety producing about just hoping that, having no sort of roadmap and hoping it'll just emerge as a complete, idea or screenplay. Anyway, so carding, I found, that structure stuff is really helpful, and I also agree that in the one screenplay that I wrote early on, where I kind of knew where the story was going and where it ended and what that ultimate scene was, I actually had a final scene. I found much more pleasure in the process. I think groping around in the dark for where things are headed, especially with something that's invented. I'm sure there's more comfort when you have, you know, some basic facts that you can adhere to, or something that came before it. And then, you know, the other thing I'd say, I could say a lot about writing with a partner and whatnot, and the differences between men and women, because he thought I gabbed too much in between, you know, little bursts of writing. I found that's where some of our juiciest stuff came from. I'm like, oh, process, and then, you know, we grab ideas that came up in these kind of random conversations and throw them into the script. I would say that, you know, Virginia Woolf was right. She wrote a little book a long time ago called A Room of One's Own. I did not have my own office when I began The Kids Are All Right, and now there is just no way I could ever return to not having my own office. You just have to wall yourself off completely and have that space to imagine.
Time for questions. There are 2 mics. There's an aisle. You can line up and ask the panel what you want to ask them. And Jeff Wells is up first, as always.
I thought perhaps David, in line with Aaron having explored the accusations of some inaccuracies as far as Zuckerberg is concerned, would you have any kind of response to what Chris Hitchens wrote 5 days ago in Slate, claiming that the King's Speech is a somewhat dishonest portrait of the leanings of King George and the Windsors in general, as far as their general tone of appeasement, and Chamberlain embracing thinking during the late 30s?
All right, I will answer that question. I wouldn't bring it up myself because I think it detracts from discussion of the film itself. But you asked the question, I think it's a valid question. Let me start off by saying very bluntly, I lost my paternal grandparents to the Holocaust. The suggestion that I would then dedicate this much of my life to somebody who I knew to be anti-Semitic, I find vile, right? Very insulting. I have read an awful lot about George VI, and I never came across a whisper that he was anti-Semitic. His brother, David, absolutely, and categorically, he was a Nazi sympathizer, as was Wallace Simpson. Now, this accusation that came up is based, may I point out, on an anonymous letter. The person didn't have the courage to sign their name and enter into discussion, all right? It is based solely on one line from a rather obscure letter that has only surfaced recently. It says, and I'm paraphrasing it, that the king says, yes, it's probably a good thing that the illegal immigrants to Palestine are being turned back. Let us look at that statement. First of all, this was before war broke out. There were no camps. The Middle East then, as of now, was in turmoil. The British had a protectorate over Palestine. They were unprepared for war. The last thing they needed was more turmoil there, so they turned back illegal immigration. In hindsight, terribly tragic, but one can understand it. Now, let us also remember that at the same time, or even later, when things were far worse in Germany, FDR turned back the steamship St. Louis, packed with refugees, sent them back to their fate. Nor was he able to convince Congress to change the quota to 200,000 children who wanted to get into the United States, because the conservative, isolationist elements of the Republican Party were blocking it. Is FDR called an anti-Semite? Is every American president from Kennedy onwards who has a policy against illegal immigration, no matter where these poor people are coming from? We turn them back from Haiti, we turn them back from Cuba, we turn them back from Central America. Is Obama called a racist for doing this? I would also like to point out that The UK was instrumental in the founding of the State of Israel in 1948. Who was the King of England in 1948? It was George VI. As for Chamberlain, all right, I too, a child of World War II, grew up thinking that Chamberlain was a dreadful man, he was an appeaser. I have learned, of course, that things are not quite black and white like that. England was unprepared for war. It needed to buy time. It is not known, but it is known now, that during that period that he bought time, he put into production all the British armaments and airplanes that were used to fight Hitler. The other thing that you've got to remember is England had suffered terribly during World War I. Bertie himself had been under fire in a boat. He had fought. The British didn't want to go to war. And when Chamberlain came back from Munich with that piece of paper saying, I have peace in our time, all right, we know that that was an empty piece of paper now. But at that particular moment, it represented the hopes and aspirations of the British people. They crowded around 10 Downing Street. They applauded Chamberlain. He was a hero. And of course, the king also didn't want to go to war. Now, there is a huge difference between not wanting to go to war and being pro-Nazi. How you can make that leap of logic eludes me totally. They're just two different things. And also, you have to remember that the king does not set policy, nor can he disagree with the policies of his government. The policy of the Chamberlain government was, we're trying to prevent war. The king had to go along with it. As it happened, he also agreed with it, but he couldn't have disagreed. So I could go on and ramble on, but it really infuriates me. This sort of anonymous attack is part of the techniques that Goebbels used. It was called the big lie then, it's called the big lie now.
Gentlemen, at the end, we're making films for a studio, but I was wondering if briefly the other four of you could say how you went from screenplay to a greenlit film, or to a film that was getting made.
Start with Scott.
Well, we started a studio, so I don't know if that's quite, we started at Paramount.
Developed at Paramount.
We developed it at Paramount, and then Relativity ended up financing it when Paramount decided not to do it. So it actually was, during most of its development, it was a studio movie and went through that process. And then when they decided not to make it, the producers, David Hoagman and Todd Lieberman and Mark Wahlberg, who was really instrumental, not only getting Christian, but sort of getting the movie made. The movie made, you know, they went out and sort of found someone else to make the movie Relativity, and then the budget came down a lot. So that was the process, and that's when it started. But it wasn't at the beginning of studio movie.
I'm afraid we have to stop. I'm having a wonderful time, but we've lost track of the time, unfortunately. We have a big panel, and let's give it a big round.